I have to share that it was hard to sing O Come Emmanuel in this space with just my voice. It made me kind of emotional, I have to say, to miss that swelling of our singing Christmas carols together and Advent carols. So, but then Judy had me laughing a bit, so thanks, Judy, for that. Do you all know the sportscaster, sports commentator Colin Cowherd? He has this segment on his radio talk show called Colin Right, Colin Wrong. And the voiceover says, Colin Right, and then Colin goes into a prediction he made about the season or a particular game or a player that turned out to be spot on, like, I don't know if Cam Newton is going to work for the Patriots this year that well. Or I think Kansas City is going to remain perched at the top of the league. And sure enough, then the voiceover says, Colin wrong. And then Colin acknowledges where he made predictions, guesses, assumptions that turned out to be wrong. Like, no way with to his size is he going to be able to handle the NFL. And Colin acknowledges how he was wrong. And those phrases came to mind for me in reading this passage about John the Baptist that Bill just read so effectively for us. John calling out in the wilderness and preparing the way for Jesus, the Messiah, to come. In certain ways, John was right, but in another way, quite frankly, John was wrong. John right, John wrong. John right, what the people needed was something of a return to the wilderness. All the prophets of the Old Testament believed this, that the people had gotten desensitized, slothful, too comfortable, indifferent, no longer turning to God for what they needed, no longer attentive to what God expected of them in terms of care for one another and justice, no longer as God-oriented, God-dependent as they were when they wandered in the wilderness. So the visionary Hebrew prophets, like John, often went out to the wilderness to preach, and the people followed them to remember that they weren't, in fact, self-made people, but God-made people. They went out there to remember that only God ultimately will be enough to see them through. And John the Baptist was right. The people needed that reminder, especially at that time. They needed something of a return to who they were and whose they were. Some of them were aligning themselves too closely with Rome and reaping wealth at the cost of their own people. Others were separating themselves from Roman society by strict laws and guidelines to distinguish themselves and becoming exclusivist. Still others were fed up with living lives oppressed in Palestine, and so they were planning rebellion. And John came crying out in the wilderness, calling people to think differently, to open their eyes and ears, to repent, to turn their lives around and place God again at the center. And this was the big thing, the one spoken of for ages, the awaited one, was coming. The one through whom all ages had come to be, the hope of generations, the fulcrum point of human history, was coming. He needed them out in the wilderness, John did, so that they could really recognize the coming, so they could be open to it, so they could recognize the one when he came. That's what the wilderness is good for. Scraping away all the excess, quieting down all the chatter, clearing the distractions, relinquishing the non-essentials in order to clarify what's most important. The literal earthen wilderness does that for a person, just you, the barren landscape, the vast sky, and survival. And the figurative landscape of wilderness times in our lives, where it's just us, the barren and tedious days, the vast future that no longer seems so certain. Both those places, the desert itself and the desert times of our lives, like, say, in the midst of a pandemic, puts us in a position of vulnerability and need that ultimately turns us towards God, that can turn us towards God. Such times tend to open us to what we hadn't been able to hear previously. Such times require more of our humble submission and admission that the future comes as gift to us, nothing else but gift. Whether hard or easy, beautiful or ugly, full of good fortune or bad, the future comes as gift. Because it has at its center, as its driver, the fully human one, the incarnation of God, God's self, Jesus Christ. This is what John was calling out in the wilderness, and rightly so. John right, John wrong. But this is where John got it wrong. With eyes wild and bloodshot, John screams out, "You brood of vipers, the one coming will baptize you with fire, and I'm not even worthy to untie his sandals, and he'll gather into his hands the wheat and burn the chaff in an everlasting cauldron of fire." And then Jesus, the incarnate one, actually shows up. And the first thing he does, he suggests John baptize him in the Jordan River. And John is like, "Wait, what? I just said, the thing about being unfit to untie your sandals, and you're asking me to baptize you? And where's your flaming sword, by the way, and your furious steed come to blast these fools?" "No, just baptize me, John," Jesus basically says, "and then I need to retreat for a time out into the wilderness. I need to get clear on who I am and where all this leads." John is stunned and remains so. Later in the gospel, there's this very poignant scene where John is in prison just before he is executed, and he sends one of his disciples to Jesus with this question. Ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or do we need to wait for someone else?" John's life's work, he doubts there at the very end. Talk about a wilderness moment for John. Because whatever Jesus had been doing, it hadn't been what John expected. What John had threatened Jesus would be doing. Jesus responds and tells John's disciples, "Go back and report to John what you have seen from me, that the blind receive their sight, that the lame walk, that the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised, and the poor have good news preached to them." We aren't told whether that satisfied John or if he died still wondering. But note, for any of us here who have doubts about our faith, about our lives, about our understanding of who God, of who Jesus is, note that even though John was full of doubts of who Jesus was, Jesus said of him, "Of those born among women, there's been no one greater than John the Baptist." We don't know whether John accepted that Jesus was the Messiah, that John's whole life had been geared towards. We don't know at the end whether John accepted that or knew that before he was executed. But the reader, we, the reader, learn more of the shape and form of the Messiah to come by what we read and what we hear of what Jesus said to John. And Jesus did not come with violent, punishing hands. But, and this is I'm going to pull some words from Eugene Druerman, a theologian, who described it like this. Jesus did not come with violent, punishing hands, separating the chaff from the wheat and burning it in the fire. Jesus sought how to open hands that are cramped into fists, how to make our hands so rich they are able to share, how to caress the hand so that it becomes tender and able to give life, how to touch the hand so that it becomes pure and everything it touches is made beautiful. This is what Jesus sought. How to talk in such a way that ears are opened and souls are moved by the truth. How to speak so that fear vanishes from the heart and that person opens to his own life, her own life in a new way. How to form human words such that the voice sings and heals. This is what Jesus sought. How to make the mouth able to speak in such a way that friendliness and trust come forth. How to speak strong words that appeal to the heart and bring about peace and freedom and justice, not imperiously demanding them. How to open the eyes so that they mirror the stars and shine with discovery of happiness. How to put the radiance of eternity and a trust in the goodness of the world into the eyes. How to make people see the beauty of all things and be thankful for the beauty of their own being. That's what Jesus was about. Helping people to see the beauty of all and be thankful for the beauty of their own being. John wrong. Jesus did not come with vengeance, but with love for the sake of love, towards the end of love. I'm not saying Jesus came soft, because Lord knows love can be exacting and even harsh at times. And that's ultimately what the wilderness reveals. When all else is pared down, all else is torn away, all else is ground to a halt, there's the space and time and awareness finally to hear what love asks of us. If there's any threat in that, it's only in losing that which is dominating our lives, which might be less than love. That's what's threatened. So we have many more months to go, I'm afraid, in this pandemic time, remaining separated and at times isolated, weary, anxious, sad. It will be, as it has been for each of us in our own ways, a certain wilderness time. Don't waste it. Make it a time of turning to God in a renewed way, or depending on God to see you through, of remembering what's most essential beneath all the chatter and hype and information that buzzes like static electricity around us. Christ has come, and in the end, Christ will be all in all. And in the meantime, right now, Christ is awaiting your response. Give yourself to Christ, even as Christ is constantly offering himself to you.